County 911, where's the emergency?
We got a guy down on the road. There was some kind of altercation with a motorcycle. It looks like he was assaulted by a guy on a bike.
So he's unconscious?
He's not moving. Are you all right, sir? Are you all right?
We're hearing from the person who came to the aid of a Caledonia man severely beaten in a road rage incident.
I heard a loud noise. It sounded like hitting the truck maybe, but when I got to the vehicle and seen the gentleman, I noticed there was no damage to the truck. So it must have been them repeatedly beating the gentleman. For people to be that angry, it's just ridiculous.
The victim, 64-year-old William McFarland, is fighting for his life in a hospital tonight. The suspect in the case, 18-year-old Christian Hillman from Ado.
Go ahead and have a seat. All right, over there.
You know why you're here, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So we don't have to, jump through that for an hour and a half. Tell us what happened tonight.
Okay, so I was riding my four-wheeler, and I was riding my dirt bike. It's like late at night out in the country, I hate to brag here, bro, but I love my bikes. I got a 1972 Harley Sportster. I got a Suzuki RMZ 250. I got a Harley 1450 Super Glide. Let's see, Yamaha TTR 230. And I got a 1985 Kawasaki.
Well,
I love my motorcycles, man.
So what's really noteworthy about his behavior is it's very unlike what we would expect in a normal teenager who's gone in for questioning with the police. In that circumstance, we might expect someone to look a little apprehensive, a little nervous, but he appears relatively calm. He says, "For sure, I know why I'm here." And then he moves into a discussion almost as if bragging about the different kinds of motorcycles that he has. In my view, this is the immature manifestation of what people with psychopathy will do, which is to set the stage for where the conversation is going to go, to kind of get your attention onto a topic they want you to be focused on.
But now to get to the actual story of what happened tonight, me and my buddies, my buddy Noah, we were riding. And all of a sudden, this guy in this truck just pulled up behind me.
So you were on what? What were you driving?
I was driving the TTR 230.
Okay.
You gotta look that bike up, nice man.
I will.
It's nice, man. But anyhow, the guy in the truck pulled up behind me. He started blaring his horn at me, and I had no idea why. He just kept riding my. I pulled over into a church parking lot, and he started getting all mad and getting out of the car and everything. And I was like, I don't want trouble. And he put his hands around my neck. And there was a thorough beating after that.
Okay.
Honestly, I feel like I was in self-defense, though.
From what we know from police evidence is that this explanation that Hillman's giving is really not plausible. He's making up this narrative, this story to displace the blame from himself onto the victim, that he was targeted. What we know about William McFarland is that he is an older adult that had mobility and health issues, and so we wouldn't assume that someone in that kind of position would be able to engage in such road rage or aggression or have anything to do with a teenager.
And then what did you do?
Well, like I used to be an ex-heavyweight boxer. So he hit me in the face once, and then I just lost my. Like I really don't like resorting to violence. Like I hate violence. Yeah, but I just lost my temper.
What'd you hit him with?
hands.
Okay.
And then, basically, after that, I kept hitting her, and I was telling her to please stay down before I have to hurt you more. Like, I really don't like hurting people. He was gonna hurt me if I didn't stop it.
Okay.
So I just had to completely make sure, like, he was immobilized, he couldn't hurt me, he couldn't hurt my friends.
What happened at the end?
Well, he was just laying there gurgling. Cause I really knocked him out cold, because I didn't want him to get back up.
I feel that the crime that Hillman committed was a disorganized and very impulsive action, and he goes from 0 to 100 in a matter of seconds. I mean, even if the victim was honking at him or something like that on the road, that in no way justifies this degree of violence. That he takes pride in his physical prowess and that he was able to exert and inflict this kind of pain. He wants people to know what he's capable of and that he's not somebody to be messed with.
You all about to lock me up?
No. Well, we need you to be completely honest with everything.
Oh, I'm being completely honest with you guys.
Okay. Not being completely honest with everything, okay? Do you realize there was an event at the church when this whole thing took place? You were so angry, you did not realize who was around, who was watching, who was listening. Who else was with you guys? There was 3 of you. The witnesses saw 3 people on ATVs and dirt bikes.
It was me and Noah riding the 4-wheeler and the dirt bike. And then my friend Ryan came and picked us up.
So your story is not even close to what these witnesses, these poor folks, saw. Not true.
Can I get an attorney in here? It's up to you. I'd like one right now.
Now we're gonna put these.
Oh, hell yeah. I never had these on before.
Yeah, you're gonna have them on now.
Do you think that's cool? What's cool?
Having those on?
No, it's just a new experience.
Okay.
Do you think it's cool to be here right now?
I mean, no, I don't think it's cool. I don't think it's cool somebody put their hands on my neck too and threaten me.
Okay.
That's not cool.
What I'm sitting here listening to, while I'm sitting here in my chair, is listening to a disrespectful 18-year-old kid who thinks that he's just talking with 2 guys instead of understanding the gravity of why he's sitting in this room. Okay? You're 18 years old, and you need to grow up, young man.
Sir, can you please stop raising your voice?
No, I will not, because you know what? You are not going to tell me what to do.
I will file a complaint on
Go ahead, do it. Go ahead.
The fact that he doesn't show any signs of what we would call social normative behavior is upsetting to the police officer. He's calm and cool. We refer to that technically in psychopathy as this shallow affect, that they don't experience and express the range or the feelings that are appropriate for the situation they're in. It's an absolutely normal human reaction on the part of the police officer, but it is triggered by the pathology that they're running into. It's triggered by the fact they're meeting with someone with psychopathy.
That's your problem. That's why you don't understand the gravity of why you're sitting in this chair at 1:30 in the morning.
He was a 65-year-old man.
And he also put his hands around
Okay, so you're going to say that to all these other witnesses saw what happened. And when we talk to your boys, I guarantee you their story isn't going to be the same. Oh, because they're going to look out for themselves.
Because they're not going to tell you.
Okay. And when we get all the evidence out of your garage and everything else, it's all right. Y'all know what? We're doing a search warrant at your house right now.
Oh, you are, huh?
Yep.
Yeah.
What we know in Psychopaths and what I think we see here with Hillman is the classic attentional deficit that they experience because they have problems in information processing, specifically in the beginning of that system where they are so myopically focused on whatever's right in front of them that they fail to process the information around them. So he's trying to repeat back so he can track what they're doing, but he's so just focused in the moment.
The bike is coming out of the garage right now. The blood all in the garage. Everything. We have it all.
There's no blood in the garage, cuz.
Okay. You slipped up, buddy.
You got a lot growing up. Oh, yeah. What the am I going to do?
We'll find out. Big tough guy.
You have no idea who you're playing with.
Yep.
Oh, believe me, I do. Hey, Dad. Well, right now I am in the Kent County Police Department. I am chained to the floor.
Well, you know what? The best thing you can do is just be quiet and cooperate as best you can.
Alright, well, I need somebody to come bail me out. Alright, I'm about to go, Mom.
Here, Hillman's calling his father, trying to get someone to bail him out. He's trying to manipulate him to get him out of a situation that he's uncomfortable in. He wants to be rescued now, and he's not being able to manipulate his father. So what we're seeing here is Hillman moving on to his next potential victim, which is his mother.
Hello?
Hey, Mama, you want to come down to the police station?
Well, I have the detectives here right now.
Alright, well, what are they saying to you, and what are they searching?
For the clothes that you wore.
Mom, why did you let them in the house?
So they have a warrant?
Oh, they had a warrant?
Yeah.
I'm really pissed. Mom, they have me chained to the floor.
They chained you to the floor?
Yeah, I'm pissed.
He's again painting himself as a victim, when in reality, he really hasn't been wronged in any way. In fact, he's the one here who killed someone.
He does throw in a few questions to find out, what do the police know? What have they found? Remember, this is about control. So he's not in control if he knows less than the police.
Mom, listen to this. You got me chained to the floor.
You're laying on the floor when you're chained.
Yeah. Real quick, listen to this. Listen to this. I am chained to the floor. Mom, please come down here. I am beyond pissed right now.
Well, I can't say if I'm feeling much better. I certainly won't be going to bed.
Mom, can you please come pick me up?
He does what I think is intimidating, and I suspect that that's what's influenced Mom's behavior in the past, where we don't want him upset, is the message. I'm getting really upset. You don't want me upset. You need to fix this.
You good on the water?
Yeah, man, I'm tired. I need to go to bed. If y'all think you're throwing yourself, can you give me a double mattress?
Look, man, it's not supposed to be plush and...
Oh, I know it's not supposed to be pleasant. I just really don't want to go to jail, man. I got plans.
You said you have plans, like you have, things you want to do in life.
Oh, yeah, I just finished my, I just finished, I actually got a 3.6 on my GPA from graduating from high school. And I'm taking a gap year between going to high school and college, and then I'm going to the University of Brooklyn to study ichthyology. Y'all need to paint some paintings up in here, man.
Chris, we've been through this. This ain't an art museum, dude.
Look, a nice little Mona Lisa right there. Yeah, I can deck this room out.
A core feature of psychopathy is superficial charm. It's disingenuous features that they make themselves out to be better than what they are. He's trying to be charming, engaging, likable. He's trying to get something out of them as well. These detectives are not taking any sort of bait. They're very disenchanted with him.
Hey, man. What's going on?
This dude's gonna document your injuries that you got. So your hands, your neck.
I have injuries in my neck.
You said he choked you, right?
Yeah, he grabbed me around here.
Right. So you should have injuries there.
Yeah.
Right?
So stand up and face me, and I'll just kind of tell you what you gotta do. Just keep your hands down, just look normal.
Any particular pose? Make sure you get a good side.
Does not think before he acts. And I think we're seeing the spontaneous, immature, impulsive side of him right there. He just had a thought, oh, get my good side. So he said it. He doesn't censor. And that's why he gets into trouble.
So I pulled up and he was like right there and this dude's like laying there unconscious. So I'm like, dude! He's like, dude, he choked me. And I was like, what? I was like, we need to go, bro.
Honestly, as badly as he was hurting, do you think this is self-defense?
Bro, he was like kicking him and like all of this like extra. I was just like,
Do you think that's a little extreme?
It's not a little extreme. It's a lot extreme.
Let me ask you this question. Would you be opposed to, did you guys text about this? You and
Yeah, he wanted me to go over last night. And I was like, we need to get our story straight and all this stuff.
Hillman makes statements that my friends would.
Emergency. I need an ambulance at 129 Shiloh Road. There's mother just came to my house. She said her kids are laying in the pool room. There's blood everywhere. She thinks they're dead. There are two boys, 14 and 12. 14 and 12. Okay, can you go over there? I'm not over there. It's my grandson. Where's their mother? She's at my house. Oh my God. I see Peyton laying on the floor. Peyton, can you hear me? Peyton! This doesn't look good. He's pulled. Where's the child? Robert! Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God! They're both dead. They're dead.
We have a local breaking news alert right now in Putnam County where two boys were found dead in a home.
12-year-old Robert Baker and 14-year-old Tayton Baker were murdered here. Now, deputies are trying to figure out what happened leading up to their deaths.
The brutal nature of the crime and the extent of overkill speaks to something very personal. It's not just If this were a home invasion and the kids were in the way, the intruder would have done the minimum to get the kids out of the way. So once they were out of the way, there's no reason to go any further. The degree of overkill here, it speaks to the fact that the killer knew his victims and was driven by some sort of intense rage.
Just don't go in there and have a seat. Yeah, I guess I'll wait for 2 minutes, okay? Yes, sir.
At this point in the investigation, detectives are bringing in the immediate family members. Most of the family's cooperating. They're willingly talking to the authorities. They're sharing whatever information they know. What we notice is that Cindy is highly emotional. She's having a hard time digesting what's happened. Mark's not showing a whole lot of affect or emotion, but he's trying to comfort his girlfriend. He's trying to respond to the situation based on what he thinks is required of him.
Mark, you and Cindy drove up here. I know you're not under arrest or anything like that.
Yeah.
Are you willing to talk to us?
Yeah, I'd really rather have an attorney present because it's the nature of it, you know. But you guys can ask me some questions.
It's up to you, man. I can't make
Obviously, we have 2 kids that are dead.
I would rather have an attorney. I'm not gonna lie. I'd rather have an attorney present.
Asking for a lawyer early in an investigation could be a sign of defensiveness. It could be a sign that he did something wrong and he doesn't know how to get out of it. I think a key feature here is his lack of emotional attachment to the children. You would think that if these were your children or your girlfriend's children or some children in your family, that you would do anything it takes to help solve their crime. You would come forth and give a DNA test, take a lie detector test. So if someone like Mark Wilson isn't doing that, investigators might assume that he has something to hide.
Okay, so what else do I have to do right now?
Nothing.
Nothing. So, I don't understand why am I still in here.
I mean, you're free to go. You're not like in trouble.
That's what I was wondering about. I'm still in here. I just started feeling uncomfortable there.
Him and Cindy came there because I had
their daughter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Cindy had told me last night that Mark didn't want to cooperate, and I got a little concerned by that. And so when I went in there this morning, I was like, hey, Mark, you know, you really need to cooperate with these people and take a lie detector test and just get it out of the way. And he says, I don't think I should take a lie detector test, Mark. And I was like, why not? I grabbed him by the face and I said, look at me. Did you hurt them boys? His eyes started to tear up. And he just said yes. Yes, I did. So, I mean, that was the only emotion I seen from him. I know he needs to be held responsible. Even though it's my son, Robert and Tatum, I'm here for them.
It's not uncommon for family members of somebody who's psychopathic or people close to them to sometimes see emotions and reactions that aren't actually there. So it's hard to know if Wilson's mom actually saw tears and full, genuine emotion from her son, or more likely, if Wilson did shed any tears or his eyes became glassy and watery, it was either an attempt to confuse his mother and manipulate her, or it may have been his own regret and sadness for the fact that he's now been found out.
Past issues with Mark and the family, what's the history?
As far as with them, I know he had some real issues. When they were staying at their house, felt like they were trying to take Caitlin and trying to set him up.
Is that something Mark normally tends to worry a lot about, is Caitlin being taken from him for whatever reasons?
Yeah, I would say yes.
So he's somewhat criminally sophisticated at this point. Been to prison for almost 5 years, engaging in drug offenses. His violent behavior is slowly escalating, and he doesn't really have that many skills to navigate life successfully, so he's living this sort of parasitic lifestyle off of others. And he's really giving nothing in return, just taking from others.
Son, on the real, me and you, right now. I need to know, right now. Right now, for my own peace of mind, what clicked in your brain that made you hurt him? What? What is it? What? Because I don't understand, son. I need to know what happened in your mind that made you flip like that. Did you realize what you were doing when you were doing it, Mark? Did you realize what was going on?
When I start seeing, people who are stressed, starting to stress out people I love.
Is that what they were doing? Stressing her?
Yeah.
They were stressing Cindy?
She's sweating. I'm like, goddamn, dude.
What did you think was gonna happen?
Like I said, I thought the first half was first.
You thought she was supposed to do the first half, which meant her sister and the little boy, and you were supposed to do the other two boys.
Yes.
Wilson at different times tries to come up with different excuses to shift the blame away from himself. He blames his girlfriend, he blames the children. He never really comes up and acknowledges and takes responsibility. And that denotes a certain degree of callousness. It denotes a certain degree of lack of empathy. I mean, at the very least, now that he's been caught, to show some degree of regret and remorse for having killed these children, but yet even at the end of this interview, he still does not.
Mark.
What?
Get up.
Yeah, so we're just trying to get from you firsthand, like, what do you know of what transpired on Charlotte Road?
Obviously there was a murder. And my two nephews are dead.
Do the kids behave?
I mean, they're not bad kids. That's why I was always trying to spend time. I've always spent time with them. Trying to take them fishing and take them out and do stuff with them,
What's transpiring here is he's posting himself up to be this sort of big brother, this hero, this very, caring and engaging individual. It's in stark contrast to what we know about him. He's someone that uses people, engages in criminal activity to get what he wants. He's just making himself out to be someone who he's not, almost trying to control the narrative of the situation, that he's a good guy, he's the innocent one, he's the role model to Robert and Tayton.
So knowing their family dynamic, and would you feel like the kids would may have called Mark and Cindy out on their drug use or taken money from Sarah? Do you feel like the kids would have stood up for their mom and said something to them in that manner?
Absolutely, probably.
Yeah.
I see Tatum sticking up for his mom, absolutely. And Robert was very quiet. I don't think Robert would have said much of anything. I think he probably would have been scared.
We're trying to understand the why in this. We know what happened, and we're trying to understand why. So talk to me, Drew. Tell me what's happened.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So we're fixing to go over this scene. Okay. Now's the time to talk. Look at me. Now's the time to talk. Okay. We've got fingernail scrapings, everything else. You think your DNA's not going to come back under their fingernails? Do you believe your DNA?
I know my DNA would come back. I didn't do it.
I'm going to play you something, okay?
Like I said, I thought the first time first.
Who's this talking?
That sounds like my mom.
Your mom and who else?
Me.
Do I need to keep showing you pictures, evidence? Help me understand this. Mark, why'd you do this?
I didn't do it.
Were you high yesterday morning? Yeah? What were you high on?
Methamphetamines.
What has Sarah's family done to you? Do you think are they turning you into DCF? Is that what this is about?
I guess.
Are you in a situation where you've got to defend your family because Sarah's family's trying to tear yours apart? Mark, look at me. You got to talk to me.
Sometimes that's how I feel. I honestly believe that my daughter was being abused. I believe.
So you believe that Robert and Tayton were sexually abusing your daughter? Or that they were having sex with Cindy?
Probably both.
One of the other theories during this investigation was that his motivation to kill the boys may have had to do with that family reporting him to CPS and his worry that his young daughter would be taken away because of his drug use. There's zero indication that either of the two victims were engaged in anything inappropriate sexually with either Wilson's young daughter or his significant other. This is somebody who desperately is grasping at straws. Wilson's willing to throw anyone and everyone under the bus in this interview just to walk out the door because he didn't do it or he did it because he had to.
Just tell me what happened and then we'll be done. Is that fair? Is that fair, Mark?
Yeah, I'll be done. I'll be done.
And they're already painting whoever did this as a monster.
Yeah.
Well,
they'll just
Which one was first, Mark? What was Robert?
It really shows us that he acted on vulnerable individuals who weren't able to fight back, didn't have really a chance to escape. He waited until they were completely knocked out to hurt them. It's a common trait for psychopaths to prey upon those weaker than themselves or those that are vulnerable that aren't able to fight back so they can then get what they want out of the situation.
Just describe what you had in your hands.
Hammer.
So they were hit with a hammer first, though, and then you cut the throats second? Okay. And why did you do that?
I spent time with them boys, man.
Yeah.
Hate them like a brother to me. Come on, brother, man.
So you're
like my little brother, man.
Yeah, and that's why we're trying to understand the overcount. Any one of those blows could have killed him. And it wasn't out of rage, it was just a cold.
Too much. It's like just waiting.
Just cold to it.
Yeah, it's old. I'm saying, man, it wasn't I'm not like that, dude. There's so much more to it, man. Trying to put you in my head, dude. Send in my head, bro.
What has Cindy done?
She just in my head all the time.
Was there more people supposed to be hurt?
I have no idea. Why would you ask me a question like that?
Mark told us that you were supposed to kill some people and then you didn't. You were supposed to kill Sarah and her child.
Are you kidding me?
No,
That is craziness. There was no plan. What you're saying makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. There's no plan at Leggett for me to kill my sister.
If they were here, sitting right here with you today, right now, and the parents were here, would you like to tell them anything?
Sorry. Big mistake. I'm so sorry, man.
Wilson is using words that he believes he should be using. Life has taught him that he should model this behavior, but because there's no depth to it, there's no sincerity to it, and he doesn't really have a lot of understanding of what emotions are or attachment is, it's just words. It's an afterthought to say, I'm sorry. It's an afterthought to say, this was a big mistake. It wasn't a big mistake. Mistakes are, I accidentally forgot to pay the bills. Mistakes are, I left something in the car that should have been put in the refrigerator. I left the milk out. Big mistakes are not brutally murdering two children that are members of your family.
On April 17th, 2011, 15-year-old Seth Tyler Jackson went to a house in Summerfield, Florida, believing he was walking toward a personal encounter with someone he had once loved. He did not know that the people waiting for him had already decided what was going to happen. By the time Seth arrived at the house belonging to 18-year-old Charlie Ely, the plan was already in motion. Michael Shane Bargo, also 18, was there. So was 16-year-old Kyle Hooper and 20-year-old Justin Soto. According to the evidence later accepted by the courts, Seth had been deliberately brought to that location as part of a plan to kill him. The person who helped bring him there was Amber Wright, Seth's former girlfriend, who was only 15 years old herself. That detail would become one of the most disturbing elements of the case. Seth did not arrive because someone forced him into a car or dragged him into an unfamiliar place. He came because he believed there was a possibility that his relationship with Amber might be repaired. Instead, he entered a house where several people were waiting for him. What followed would become one of the most notorious murder cases in Florida. A case involving teenage relationships, resentment, planning violence, an attempt to destroy evidence, and years of courtroom proceedings. At the center of it all was a boy who was 15 years old. To understand what happened to Seth Jackson, however, it is necessary to begin before the attack. Before the body was concealed, before investigators began connecting the people involved. The story begins with a relationship. Seth had been dating Amber Wright since late 2010. They were both teenagers, and by March 2011, the relationship had ended. After the breakup, Amber began a relationship with Michael Bargo. That change in the relationship between the three teenagers became an important part of what followed. Bargo developed intense hostility towards Seth. According to the evidence presented at trial, Bargo believed that Seth had mistreated or hurt Amber. But the evidence did not establish that this belief accurately reflected what had actually happened. What mattered in the case was not simply whether Bargo's belief was justified. What mattered was what he did because of it. The conflict between Bargo and Seth became increasingly serious. There were arguments, hostility, and threats. Approximately 1 week before Seth was killed, Bargo went to Seth's home. During an argument there, Seth's mother heard Bargo make a chilling threat involving a bullet with Seth's name on it. At the time, that threat was a warning. Later, it would become part of the larger picture presented to investigators and prosecutors. A week later, the threat had become reality. The Florida Supreme Court would ultimately identify Bargo as the person who planned the murder and coordinated the participation of the others. That distinction is important because this was not presented as a spontaneous confrontation that suddenly became deadly. According to the evidence accepted in court, there was preparation. There were different roles. Amber was connected to Seth through their former relationship. Charlie Ely owned the house where the ambush occurred. Kyle Hooper, Amber's brother, participated in the initial assault. Justin Soto later helped restrain Seth. Bargo was the central figure who planned and directed the killing. James Havens, Amber and Kyle's stepfather, was accused of a different role connected to what happened after the murder. Each person would eventually face a different legal outcome, but on April 17, 2011, their actions converged around one 15-year-old boy. The plan depended upon something simple but devastating. Seth had to come to the house. According to the evidence, Amber Wright played that role. She led Seth to believe that the two of them might reconcile. Seth went to Charlie Ely's house without knowing that an attack had been prepared. This is where the case takes on its most unsettling quality. The danger was not visible to Seth when he arrived. The person who could make the invitation seem familiar was someone he already knew. The location was not presented to him as the scene of a planned murder. And waiting inside were people who, according to the prosecution's case and later court findings, had already committed themselves to a very different outcome. When Seth entered the house, the violence began. Kyle Hooper struck him in the head. Bargo shot him. Despite being seriously wounded, Seth managed to get out of the house and attempted to escape. For a brief moment, there was a possibility that he might get away from the people who had attacked him. But Justin Soto pursued him and restrained him. Seth was taken back inside. Bargo continued the attack. According to evidence described in the Florida Supreme Court's proceedings, Bargo wanted Seth to know who was killing him. Bargo remained with Seth in the bathroom, where he beat and verbally abused him before continuing the shooting. Eventually, Bargo fired the shot that caused Seth's death. The violence itself was only one part of what followed. Once Seth was dead, the people involved were confronted with the evidence of what they had done. The group attempted to conceal the murder. Seth's body was placed in a sleeping bag. Bargo and Soto took the body to the fire pit behind Ely's house, where it was burned. Bleach was used in an attempt to clean the house and remove traces of blood. The remains were then placed into approximately 5-gallon paint buckets and taken to a flooded quarry area, where they were discarded. Havens was accused of assisting with the aftermath, including helping with the disposal of the body and helping Bargo leave the area. His alleged role was legally different from that of the people who were prosecuted directly for the murder. At first, however, the full picture was not available. Seth was gone. His family and friends became concerned. The investigation began with the people who had been connected to him shortly before his disappearance. Gradually, investigators began to uncover the connection between Seth, Amber Wright, the house belonging to Charlie Ely, Michael Bargo, and the other people involved. What initially might have appeared to be a disappearance increasingly revealed itself as something far more deliberate. Seth had not simply vanished. He had been brought somewhere. People had been waiting for him. Violence had taken place, and afterward, someone had tried to erase the evidence. The investigation would eventually lead to arrests, trials, convictions, and years of appeals. Michael Bargo would be convicted of first-degree murder with a firearm in 2013. His original death sentence would later be vacated because of legal developments following Hurst versus Florida, leading to a new sentencing proceeding. A second jury unanimously recommended death, and the Florida Supreme Court ultimately upheld that sentence in 2021. The other defendants would also face the consequences of their involvement. Charlie Ely and Justin Soto would receive life sentences. Amber Wright and Kyle Hooper would receive life without parole, and James Havens would face an accessory after-the-fact charge, although he was later found incompetent to stand trial. But before the verdicts, before the appeals, and before the legal arguments over who was responsible and what punishment was appropriate, there was only Seth Jackson, a 15-year-old boy walking toward a house without knowing what waited inside. His death was not the result of a single moment of uncontrolled anger. According to the evidence accepted by the courts, it followed a chain of decisions. A relationship ended, resentment grew, a threat was made, a plan was formed, an invitation was extended, and a teenager walked into a trap. The story of Seth Jackson is therefore not simply the story of how a young life ended. It is the story of how a conflict involving teenagers was transformed into a deliberate killing, and how the people responsible then tried to conceal what they had done. To understand why that happened, we have to go back to the beginning, to the relationship between Seth and Amber, to the arrival of Michael Bargo in that relationship, and to the hostility that would eventually become a plan for murder. Before April 17, 2011, there was no murder investigation, no courtroom, and no chain of convictions connecting several young people to the death of a 15-year-old boy. There was only a relationship between two teenagers, a breakup, and the complicated emotions that followed. Seth Tyler Jackson was 15 years old and lived in the Ocala and Summerfield area of Florida. He had been dating Amber Wright, who was also 15. They began their relationship toward the end of 2010, at an age when relationships can feel intensely important even though the people involved are still very young. By March 2011, however, Seth and Amber had broken up. The relationship was over, but the story between them was not. After the breakup, Amber began dating Michael Shane Bargo, who was 18 years old. Bargo's arrival changed the situation between the three teenagers. According to the evidence presented later in court, Bargo developed a strong hostility towards Seth. He believed that Seth had mistreated Amber or had somehow caused her harm. That belief became an important part of the prosecution's explanation for what followed. But there is an important distinction that must be preserved. The evidence did not establish that Bargo's belief accurately reflected what Seth had actually done. What can be established from the court record is that Bargo believed something had happened, that he became increasingly hostile towards Seth, and that the hostility eventually moved far beyond an ordinary dispute between teenagers. The relationship between Seth and Amber had ended, but the conflict surrounding it continued. Arguments and threats became part of the background. The supplied court material describes a confrontation approximately 1 week before Seth's death, when Bargo went to Seth's home. During the argument, Seth's mother heard Bargo make a threat involving a bullet with Seth's name on it. At that moment, the words were a threat. In retrospect, they became one of the most significant warning signs in the case. The distance between threatening someone and actually killing them can seem enormous. Yet in this case, The events that followed would make the earlier threat impossible to ignore. Within roughly a week, Seth would be dead. The threat also helps explain why investigators and prosecutors later viewed the killing as something more deliberate than a confrontation that simply became violent. The case was ultimately built around the conclusion that Michael Bargo planned the murder and coordinated the involvement of other people. That conclusion was accepted by the Florida Supreme Court. But the planning could not succeed through Bargo alone. It required access to Seth, a location, other participants, and most importantly, a reason for Seth to arrive without realizing what was waiting for him. Amber Wright was central to that part of the plan. She was not a stranger to Seth. She was the person he had dated. She knew him, and he knew her. After their breakup, Amber had begun a relationship with Bargo, but she remained connected to Seth through their history together. According to the evidence accepted in court, Amber eventually helped bring Seth to the house where the ambush would take place. The significance of that role cannot be separated from the history between the two teenagers. Seth did not need to be persuaded by someone he had never met. He could be approached through a relationship that already existed. The prosecution's evidence indicated that Amber made Seth believe there was a possibility that the two might reconcile. That belief was enough to bring him to Charlie Ely's house on April 17th. The house itself belonged to 18-year-old Charlie Ely. It would become the location where the plan was carried out. Waiting there were people whose roles had already been established within the prosecution's case. Michael Bargo, Kyle Hooper, Justin Soto, and others. Kyle Hooper was 16 and Amber's brother. Justin Soto was 20. Their ages alone demonstrate something unsettling about the case. Several of the people involved were barely beyond childhood themselves. Yet the actions attributed to them were not childish mistakes or an impulsive argument that ended tragically. The evidence described a coordinated sequence in which different people performed different roles. Bargo was identified as the planner and coordinator. Amber was involved in bringing Seth to the location. Ely provided the house. Hooper participated in the initial assault. Soto participated in restraining Seth. Later, the group attempted to conceal the killing. Each action became part of the larger chain. And at the center of that chain was Seth. It is tempting when discussing a case like this to reduce the people involved to labels: victim, killer, accomplice, witness. But before Seth became a name in a criminal case, he was a 15-year-old who had been involved in an ordinary teenage relationship. The available information does not provide a complete biography of his childhood, his ambitions, or his daily life, and it would be wrong to invent those details. What we do know is enough to establish the human scale of the tragedy. Seth was 15. His relationship with Amber had ended only weeks before his death. The conflict that followed that breakup eventually placed him in a situation he could not recognize as dangerous. That is one of the central elements of the case. The person who helped bring him into the situation was connected to his own past. The invitation did not need to appear threatening. It could be presented as something familiar. The relationship itself became the mechanism through which the trap worked. Meanwhile, Bargo's hostility towards Seth had reached a point where, according to the evidence, he was no longer merely arguing with him. The threat at Seth's home demonstrated that the conflict had become serious. Then came the planning. The Florida Supreme Court's later findings are important because they give the case a legal framework. The court identified Bargo as the person who planned the murder and directed the participation of the others. This was not simply a matter of assigning blame after the fact. The evidence presented at trial showed a sequence in which the participants' actions fit together. The house was available. People were waiting. Seth was brought there. The attack began when he arrived. And after the killing, the group attempted to destroy evidence and dispose of the remains. The relationship between Seth, Amber, and Bargo therefore sits at the beginning of the entire chain. A breakup had occurred. Amber began dating Bargo. Bargo developed hostility towards Seth. A threat was made. Then, according to the prosecution's case, a decision was made to turn hostility into murder. The most important point is that none of this made Seth responsible for what happened to him. Whatever disagreements had existed between the teenagers, whatever Bargo believed about Amber and Seth, none of those circumstances justified what followed. The responsibility belonged to the people who chose to participate in the killing. By the time April 17th arrived, the crucial pieces were already in place. There was a planner, there were participants, there was a house, and there was a teenager who could be persuaded to come there. The final step was deceptively simple. Seth had to believe the invitation was genuine. He had to believe that going to that house might lead to something familiar, a conversation, perhaps a reconciliation, or simply another meeting with someone from his past. Instead, the invitation would become the doorway through which the entire plan was carried out. And on that April evening, Seth Jackson would make the decision to go there, unaware that the relationship he once shared with Amber Wright had become part of a plan that would end his life. By the time April 17th, 2011 arrived, the conflict surrounding Seth Jackson had moved beyond the kind of argument that might ordinarily end with people simply going their separate ways. According to the evidence later presented in court, Michael Shane Bargo had formed a plan to kill Seth and had coordinated the involvement of several other people. That finding would become one of the central facts in the prosecution of the case and would later be recognized by the Florida Supreme Court. But understanding the plan requires looking carefully at the people who surrounded it, because each person occupied a different place in the chain of events. At the center was Bargo, 18 years old. Around him were teenagers and young adults whose relationships with one another helped make the plan possible. Amber Wright was 15. She was Seth's former girlfriend and Bargo's girlfriend after the breakup. Kyle Hooper was 16 and Amber's brother. Charlie Ely was 18 and owned the house where the attack would take place. Justin Soto was 20 and would later participate in restraining Seth. James Havens, 37, was Amber and Kyle's stepfather and would become associated with the aftermath rather than being identified as one of the people who directly killed Seth. These distinctions matter. The case was not built around the idea that everyone involved had performed the same act. Their alleged and proven roles were different, and the courts treated them differently. Yet the prosecution presented their actions as parts of a connected sequence. The first and most important element of the plan was Bargo's hostility towards Seth. Bargo believed that Seth had mistreated Amber or had caused her harm. The evidence did not establish that this belief was an accurate description of what had actually happened. But whether justified or not, the belief became part of Bargo's motivation. The hostility between Bargo and Seth escalated into arguments and threats. About a week before Seth's death, Bargo went to Seth's home, where an argument occurred. Seth's mother heard Bargo make a threat involving a bullet with Seth's name on it. That statement is significant because it demonstrates that the conflict had already reached the level of an explicit threat before the murder itself. It also provides context for what happened next. The killing was not presented to the courts as something that emerged without warning. Instead, the evidence showed a progression from resentment to confrontation to planning. But a plan to kill Seth required more than anger. It required an opportunity. It required a location. And it required Seth to arrive there without understanding what was about to happen. That was where Amber's relationship with Seth became central. Amber knew Seth because they had dated beginning in late 2010. Their relationship had ended in March 2011, only weeks before the murder. After the breakup, she became involved with Bargo. According to the evidence accepted by the courts, Amber helped bring Seth to the house belonging to Charlie Ely by giving him the impression that the two of them might reconcile. The details supplied in the case record do not provide a complete transcript of their communications, and there is no basis for inventing a conversation between them. What can be said is that the invitation succeeded. Seth went to the house. That simple fact became the turning point in the plan. Charlie Ely's house was not simply a place where the violence happened by coincidence. It was the location where the participants were waiting for Seth. Ely, who was 18, owned the house. Bargo was there. Kyle Hooper was there. Justin Soto was there. Other people were also connected to the events. The house, therefore, became the physical center of the plan, the place where Seth would arrive believing he was meeting someone from his past, while the people inside were prepared for an entirely different encounter. The roles attributed to the participants reveal how the plan depended upon cooperation. Amber's role was connected to access. She could bring Seth to the location. Ely's role was connected to the location itself. Hooper participated in the initial assault. Soto would later restrain Seth after he attempted to escape. Bargo remained the central figure, both in the planning and in the violence that ultimately killed Seth. This division of roles is important because it explains why prosecutors could argue that the murder was coordinated rather than spontaneous. The events did not begin with Seth accidentally encountering Bargo and suddenly becoming involved in a deadly confrontation. According to the evidence, Seth was deliberately brought to a particular place where several people were already waiting for him. The plan depended upon deception. Seth had to believe that Amber's invitation meant one thing, while the people around her understood it to mean something else. The tragedy lies partly in that difference between appearance and reality. Seth was 15 years old. He had recently ended a relationship with Amber, and according to the evidence, he was given a reason to believe that the relationship might be repaired. There was no indication in the supplied material that he knew he was walking into an ambush. That lack of knowledge was essential to the plan. If Seth had understood what was waiting inside the house, he would have had no reason to walk through the door. The plan therefore relied not only on hostility, but also on familiarity. Someone Seth already knew could reach him. Someone he had once dated could persuade him to come. And once he arrived, the people who had been waiting could act. The presence of Kyle Hooper and Justin Soto added further strength to the plan. Hooper was Amber's brother, 16 years old. According to the evidence later described in the court proceedings, he participated in striking Seth during the initial attack. Soto, 20, would become involved when Seth attempted to escape. He pursued and restrained him, allowing Seth to be brought back inside. These actions would later be considered alongside Bargo's conduct in determining responsibility. The plan also extended beyond the moment of the killing. According to the evidence, the participants attempted to conceal what had happened afterward. Seth's body was placed in a sleeping bag, and Bargo and Soto took it to the fire pit behind Ely's house. The body was burned. Bleach was used in an attempt to clean the house, and the remaining material was later placed into approximately 5-gallon paint buckets and discarded in a flooded quarry area. Havens was accused of assisting with the aftermath and helping Bargo leave the area. This later conduct became an important part of the investigation because it showed that the people involved did not simply leave the scene after the violence. There was an effort to conceal the crime. But before the body was moved, before the house was cleaned, and before the remains were discarded, the plan still had to reach its decisive moment. Seth had to arrive. On April 17th, he did. The person who brought him there was Amber. The house belonged to Ely. Bargo and the others were waiting. At that point, the plan no longer existed only as an intention. It was about to become an act. From a distance, the sequence can appear almost painfully simple. A relationship had ended. Another relationship had begun. Resentment had grown, and a teenager was invited to a house. But behind those ordinary elements was a decision that would change every life connected to the case. Seth did not know what the invitation represented. Bargo did. The others involved knew. And when Seth crossed the threshold of that house, the carefully constructed separation between deception and violence was about to disappear. The next stage would last only a short time, but it would determine the entire course of the investigation, the trials, and the lives of everyone involved. April 17th, 2011 began as another day in Summerfield, Florida, but by the end of it, the name Seth Jackson would be connected forever to a house, a group of young people, and a murder that had been deliberately planned. The events of that day are important because because the killing did not begin with Seth being dragged into an unknown location. According to the evidence later accepted by the courts, he was persuaded to go there. The person who helped make that possible was Amber Wright, his former girlfriend. That detail sits at the center of the tragedy. Seth was 15 years old. Amber was 15. They had been together beginning in late 2010, but their relationship ended in March 2011. After the breakup, Amber began dating Michael Shane Bargo, who was 18. By April, the relationship between Seth and Bargo had become hostile. Bargo believed that Seth had mistreated Amber, although the evidence presented at trial did not establish that this belief accurately reflected what had happened. There had been arguments and threats, including the confrontation at Seth's home approximately 1 week earlier, when Seth's mother heard Bargo make a threat involving a bullet with Seth's name on it. What happened next transformed those threats into a plan. The Florida Supreme Court later recognized Bargo as the person who had planned the murder and coordinated the participation of the others. But a plan, however serious, still required a way to bring Seth within reach. That was the role Amber played. According to the evidence, Amber led Seth to believe that the two of them might reconcile. The available information does not provide a full record of their private conversation, and there is no basis for reconstructing dialogue that is not documented. What can be established is the consequence of that invitation. Seth agreed to go to the house belonging to Charlie Ely in Summerfield. To Seth, the reason for going appeared to be connected to Amber and their past relationship. To the people waiting at the house, his arrival represented something entirely different. The house had become the setting for an ambush. Charlie Ely was 18 years old and owned the property. Michael Bargo was there. Kyle Hooper, Amber's 16-year-old brother, was there. Justin Soto, 20, was also involved. According to the evidence, the group was waiting for Seth to arrive. The significance of the location was therefore not accidental. It was part of the plan. Seth was being directed toward a place where the people intending to attack him had an advantage. They knew what was going to happen, while he did not. That difference in knowledge was decisive. When a person walks into a room unaware that a threat exists, every ordinary action can become part of the trap. Seth had no reason, based on the invitation as it was presented, to understand that he was approaching danger. The person who had once been his girlfriend was connected to the invitation. The house belonged to someone within the group, and inside were people prepared for violence. The available evidence does not tell us exactly what Seth was thinking during the journey or what he expected to happen after he arrived. It would be easy in a narrative like this to fill that silence with imagined thoughts, but doing so would create a story rather than a factual account. What we know is more limited and, in its own way, more disturbing. Seth went there. He entered the location. He did not know that the people inside had prepared for his arrival. The moment he arrived, the plan moved from preparation to action. According to the evidence described in the later court proceedings, Kyle Hooper struck Seth in the head. Michael Bargo then shot him. The attack was severe enough to cause serious injury. But Seth did not simply remain where he had been attacked. He managed to get outside and attempted to escape. That brief attempt to get away is one of the most important moments in the entire sequence because it demonstrates that the violence did not immediately end Seth's ability to resist. Despite his injuries, he tried to flee. But the people who had attacked him were not prepared to let him go. Justin Soto pursued Seth and restrained him. Seth was then brought back inside the house. The opportunity to escape disappeared. What followed was even more deliberate. According to the evidence later presented to the courts, Bargo wanted Seth to know who was responsible for killing him. Bargo remained with Seth in the bathroom, where he beat and verbally abused him and continued shooting. Eventually, Bargo fired the shot that caused Seth's death. The significance of these events would later become central to the prosecution's argument that Bargo was not simply present at the scene. He had planned the murder, coordinated the participation of others, and personally carried out the fatal violence. Yet April 17th did not end when Seth died. The group now faced the consequences of what they had done. The body had to be concealed. Evidence had to be removed. The house had to be cleaned. According to the supplied evidence, Seth's body was placed inside a sleeping bag. Bargo and Justin Soto then took it to the fire pit behind Charlie Ely's house. The body was burned. Bleach was used in an attempt to clean the house and remove blood. What remained was placed into approximately 5-gallon paint buckets and taken to a flooded quarry area, where it was discarded. James Havens, Amber and Kyle's stepfather, was accused of assisting with the aftermath, including helping with the disposal of the body and helping Bargo leave the area. His alleged involvement was treated differently from that of the people prosecuted directly for the murder. These actions after the killing would later become part of the evidence surrounding the case. But at the time, the most immediate consequence was that Seth had disappeared. His family and friends would soon become concerned. The investigation would begin with a basic question: where was Seth Jackson? But the answer would eventually lead investigators back to the house in Summerfield. It would lead them to Amber Wright, to Michael Bargo, to Kyle Hooper, to Charlie Ely, to Justin Soto, and to the events that had taken place on April 17th. The investigation would reveal that Seth had not simply vanished. He had been deliberately brought to a particular location. People had been waiting for him. He had been attacked, had tried to escape, and had been captured again. He had been killed. Then an effort had been made to destroy the evidence and conceal his remains. The transition from disappearance to murder investigation would not happen in a single instant. It would emerge through the accumulation of information about the people Seth had known and the places he had been. But the critical fact had already been established. The invitation that brought Seth to Ely's house had not been innocent. It had been part of a plan, and the person who accepted that invitation had no idea what waited for him. That is what makes the opening of the Seth Jackson case so difficult to separate from the relationship that came before it. The invitation did not arrive from an unknown enemy. It came through someone who had once been part of Seth's life. The familiarity made the trap possible. The plan depended on trust, or at least on the absence of suspicion. Seth crossed the threshold believing he was walking toward one kind of encounter. The people inside were preparing for another. By the time he understood the danger, he had already been attacked. Even then, when he managed to escape the house, the plan continued. He was pursued, restrained, brought back, and ultimately killed. The house in Summerfield would soon become the center of a criminal investigation. But before investigators reconstructed what had happened, before prosecutors presented their case, and before judges and juries examined the responsibility of each participant, there was a missing 15-year-old boy and a family waiting for answers. The next stage of the story would be the search for those answers, and the gradual discovery that Seth's disappearance was not a mystery at all, but the aftermath of a carefully coordinated murder. The moment Seth Jackson entered Charlie Ely's house on April 17, 2011, the plan that had existed in preparation became a physical reality. He had arrived believing that the invitation from Amber Wright might lead to a reconciliation or another personal encounter between two teenagers who had once been together. Instead, according to the evidence later presented in court, he was entering an ambush. Michael Shane Bargo, Kyle Hooper, Justin Soto, and others were waiting for him. What happened next would become the central sequence of the murder case. The first attack was sudden. Kyle Hooper struck Seth in the head. Bargo then shot him. Seth was only 15 years old, and the injuries he suffered were serious. But they did not immediately prevent him from trying to survive. He managed to get out of the house. For a brief moment, the plan appeared to have failed in the most basic sense. The intended victim was outside and attempting to escape. But the people who had attacked him did not allow him to get away. Justin Soto pursued Seth and restrained him. Seth was brought back inside. The attempt to escape had ended, and the attack resumed. This sequence would later become particularly important in understanding the roles of the participants. The evidence did not portray the killing as a single impulsive act by one person. Instead, different individuals became involved at different points. Hooper participated in the initial assault. Bargo used the firearm and remained at the center of the violence. Soto pursued and restrained Seth after he attempted to escape. The actions fit together within the broader plan that prosecutors attributed to Bargo. The fact that Seth tried to flee also underscores the difference between what he knew and what the attackers knew. He had not entered the house expecting to fight for his life. The people waiting for him had already prepared for violence. Once the attack began, Seth had to react to a situation he had not anticipated. The supplied court material does not provide a detailed account of what Seth said during those moments, nor does it give a record of his private thoughts. It would therefore be wrong to invent his final words or describe his emotions as though they were known. What can be stated with certainty from the case information is that he attempted to escape after being attacked. That attempt failed because Soto caught him and restrained him. He was taken back into the house, where Bargo continued the attack. The later proceedings place particular emphasis on Bargo's conduct during this stage. According to the evidence described by the Florida Supreme Court, Bargo did not simply shoot Seth and leave. He remained with him in the bathroom. There, Bargo beat and verbally abused Seth and continued shooting him. The evidence further indicated that Bargo wanted Seth to know who was responsible for his death. That detail became significant because it illustrated the deliberate nature of Bargo's conduct. The prosecution's case was not that Bargo had accidentally caused Seth's death during a confrontation. It was that he had planned the murder, directed the involvement of others, and personally carried out the fatal attack. Eventually, Bargo fired the shot that caused Seth's death. A 15-year-old boy who had arrived at the house believing he was responding to an invitation was dead. The violence was over, but the decisions made by the people involved were not. The group now had another problem: Seth's body and the evidence left behind by the attack. According to the supplied material, the participants attempted to conceal the murder. Seth's body was placed inside a sleeping bag. Bargo and Justin Soto took the body outside to the fire pit behind Charlie Ely's house. There they burned it. The effort was not limited to the body itself. The house also contained evidence of what had happened. The group used bleach in an attempt to clean the property and remove blood. The remains left after the burning were then placed into approximately 5-gallon paint buckets. Those containers were taken to a flooded quarry area and discarded. These actions became part of the larger picture investigators would eventually reconstruct. They also demonstrated that the events did not end with the fatal shooting. There was a second stage: concealment. The distinction is important because the murder and the subsequent attempt to hide it involved different acts and, in the case of James Havens, different alleged legal responsibility. Havens, Amber and Kyle's stepfather, was accused of being an accessory after the fact to first-degree murder. His alleged involvement concerned assistance with the aftermath, including the handling of the body and helping Bargo leave the area. He was not identified in the supplied material as one of the people who directly killed Seth. His case would ultimately take a different legal path. But on the night Seth died, the immediate objective was to prevent the discovery of what had happened. For the people involved, concealment could not change the fact that a 15-year-old had been killed. It could only delay discovery. The use of bleach, the burning of the body, and the disposal of the remains were attempts to erase physical evidence. But they could not erase the sequence of decisions that had brought Seth to the house. He had been invited there. He had been attacked. He had tried to escape. He had been restrained. He had been brought back inside. Bargo had continued the attack until Seth died. Then the group had attempted to conceal the evidence. Each step would later become part of the narrative presented to investigators and prosecutors. But immediately after the killing, none of that was known to the public. Seth was simply missing. His family and friends did not know where he was. The people closest to him had to confront the absence of a 15-year-old who had not returned home. The investigation that followed would begin to reconstruct the last known movements of his life. The importance of the people around Seth would quickly become apparent. Amber Wright was one of the most obvious connections because she had been his former girlfriend. Her connection to Bargo made the situation even more significant. Charlie Ely's house became another critical link because that was where the attack had occurred. Kyle Hooper and Justin Soto were connected to the violence itself. Bargo stood at the center of the allegations because the evidence indicated that he had planned and coordinated the killing. As investigators began examining those relationships, the disappearance would gradually take on a different meaning. The question was no longer simply where Seth had gone. It was what had happened to him after he was brought to Ely's house. The answer was devastating. He had been deliberately targeted. He had been attacked by several people. He had attempted to escape. He had been captured again, and he had been killed. The events of April 17th therefore form a complete chain from deception to violence and from violence to concealment. At the beginning of that chain was an invitation. At the end was the death of a 15-year-old. Between those 2 points were the actions of several people, each contributing in a different way to what happened. The Florida courts would later examine those actions individually, determining the criminal responsibility of each defendant. But before that could happen, investigators first had to discover the truth. They had to determine where Seth had gone, who had last seen him, why he had gone there, and what had happened inside the house. The answers would eventually expose the plan and lead to arrests. Yet the first step was the disappearance itself. Somewhere behind the apparent absence of a missing teenager was a sequence of events that had already taken place. Seth Jackson was no longer alive. The people connected to his death had tried to make the evidence disappear. But a murder does not become less real because its perpetrators attempt to hide it. The investigation would begin by following the connections Seth had left behind, and those connections would lead directly back to the people who had been waiting for him. After Seth Jackson was killed, the people responsible were no longer dealing with the question of what they intended to do. They were dealing with what they had already done. A 15-year-old boy was dead inside a house in Summerfield, Florida, and the evidence of the attack remained around them. According to the evidence later presented in court, the group then attempted to conceal the murder and destroy evidence connecting them to Seth's death. This part of the story is important because it reveals that the events of April 17th did not end with the shooting. There was a deliberate effort afterward to hide the body, clean the location, and dispose of what remained. Those actions would eventually become part of the evidence used to reconstruct what had happened. Seth's body was placed inside a sleeping bag. Bargo and Justin Soto then took the body outside, to the fire pit behind Charlie Ely's house. There they burned it. The decision to burn the body was an attempt to prevent investigators from finding Seth as he had been after the attack. But destroying a body could not erase the fact that a killing had taken place. It could only change the physical evidence investigators would later have to examine. The house itself presented another problem. The attack had left evidence behind, including blood. According to the case information, the group used bleach to clean the house in an attempt to remove traces of what had happened. This was not an act connected to the original conflict between Seth and Bargo. It belonged to a different stage of the crime: concealment. The distinction is significant because it demonstrates that the events were not limited to the moment of violence. After Seth died, decisions were made about what to do next. The body had to be moved, the location had to be cleaned, and the remaining evidence had to be taken somewhere else. What happened to Seth's remains afterward was equally deliberate. After the body had been burned, the remaining material was placed into approximately 5-gallon paint buckets. Those containers were then taken to a flooded quarry area and discarded. The purpose was clear from the circumstances described in the case. The remains were being removed from the location where the murder had occurred and placed somewhere more difficult to discover. Again, however, concealment did not undo the murder. It created another series of actions that investigators could eventually trace. The role of James Havens requires separate attention because his involvement was different from that of Bargo, Hooper, Ely, Soto, and Amber Wright. Havens was 37 years old and was the stepfather of Amber and Kyle. He was accused of being an accessory after the fact to first-degree murder. His alleged involvement concerned what happened after Seth had already been killed, including assistance connected with the disposal of the body and helping Bargo leave the area. He was not identified in the supplied material as one of the people who directly carried out the killing. That distinction later mattered legally. In 2012, Havens was determined to be incompetent to stand trial. His case therefore did not follow the same path as those of the defendants who were prosecuted directly for Seth's murder. The different roles of the participants became increasingly important as the investigation developed. Michael Bargo was identified as the planner and coordinator. Amber Wright was connected to Seth through their former relationship and had helped bring him to the house. Kyle Hooper participated in the initial attack. Justin Soto restrained Seth after he attempted to escape and later helped move the body. Charlie Ely owned the house where the ambush took place. Havens was accused of assisting afterward. These were not interchangeable roles. They formed a chain, and that chain extended beyond the moment Seth died. The attempt to destroy evidence also created a difficult problem for investigators. A crime scene can provide answers through physical evidence. But when people deliberately clean a location and dispose of a body, the investigation must reconstruct events through connections among people, places, statements, and other available evidence. In Seth's case, the investigation began after his family and friends became concerned about his disappearance. At first, the central question was where he had gone. The answer would gradually emerge through the people he had been connected to immediately before his disappearance. Amber Wright was one of those people. She had been Seth's girlfriend, and according to the evidence, she had been involved in bringing him to the house. The house itself provided another connection. It belonged to Charlie Ely, one of the people associated with the planned attack. Bargo, Hooper, and Soto were also connected to the location and the violence. As these relationships became clearer, the idea that Seth had simply disappeared became increasingly difficult to sustain. The evidence pointed towards something intentional. He had gone to a particular house. People had been waiting for him. He had been attacked. He had attempted to escape. He had been restrained and brought back. He had been killed. Then the people involved had attempted to hide what they had done. The attempt to conceal the body, therefore, became part of the larger narrative rather than a separate mystery. It demonstrated what happened after the central act and helped investigators understand that the participants had taken additional steps to prevent discovery. Yet there is an important limitation when reconstructing this part of the case. The supplied information does not provide a complete forensic inventory, detailed laboratory findings, or a full transcript of the investigators' work. It does not tell us every piece of physical evidence recovered or every statement made during the investigation. For that reason, those details should not be invented. What can be established is the sequence. Seth was killed, his body was placed in a sleeping bag. Bargo and Soto moved it to the fire pit behind Ely's house. The body was burned. Bleach was used to clean the house. The remaining material was placed into paint buckets, and the buckets were discarded in a flooded quarry area. That sequence was enough to become an important part of the case against the people involved. The effort to erase the evidence also reveals something about the structure of the crime. Before the murder, there had been planning. During the murder, different participants had different responsibilities. Afterward, there was another coordinated effort to conceal the result. The case therefore unfolded across 3 stages: preparation, execution, and concealment. Each stage involved choices. The killing itself was not the only decision that determined what happened to Seth. Decisions continued after his death. The body could have been left where it was. Instead, it was moved. The evidence could have been left untouched. Instead, the house was cleaned. The remains could have remained at the property. Instead, they were placed into containers and taken away. Those actions could not bring Seth back, but they would later become evidence of what the participants had done after the murder. Meanwhile, outside the house, Seth's family and friends were beginning to confront a different reality. He was missing. They did not initially know that he had been killed or that an attempt was being made to conceal his remains. The investigation would have to bridge that gap between what the family knew and what had actually happened. Slowly, the people connected to Seth's final movements would become central to that investigation. Amber's connection to Seth led investigators toward the circumstances of his final meeting. Her relationship with Bargo provided another link. Ely's house connected the people and the location. Hooper and Soto were connected to the physical attack. The actions surrounding the body provided another layer of evidence. The case was beginning to take shape. The disappearance of a 15-year-old boy was no longer simply unexplained. It was becoming a murder investigation involving multiple suspects and multiple roles. The attempt to erase Seth's presence had not erased the story. It had created another part of it. And as investigators followed the connections left behind, the house in Summerfield would become the starting point for reconstructing the final hours of Seth Jackson's life, and for identifying the people who had been waiting for him when he walked through the door. When Seth Jackson did not return home, the people who cared about him were left with a question that had no immediate answer. Where was the 15-year-old boy? At that point, the full sequence of events inside Charlie Ely's house was not publicly known. Seth's family and friends did not initially have the information that would later emerge through the investigation and court proceedings. They knew that he was missing. They did not know that he had been deliberately brought to a particular house, attacked by several people, killed, and then subjected to an attempt at concealment. The investigation would have to uncover that chain one connection at a time. The first important step was to examine the people who had been connected to Seth shortly before his disappearance. This was especially significant because Seth had not simply disappeared without any known destination. According to the evidence later accepted by the courts, he had been brought to a specific location. That meant the circumstances surrounding his final movements could potentially reveal what had happened to him. One of the most important connections was Amber Wright. Amber was Seth's former girlfriend. They had dated beginning in late 2010 and broken up in March 2011. After the breakup, Amber began dating Michael Shane Bargo. That placed Amber at the intersection of two relationships that had become central to the case. She knew Seth, and she was connected to Bargo. According to the evidence presented at trial, Amber had also played a role in bringing Seth to Charlie Ely's house on April 17th. Investigators, therefore, had a crucial question to answer. Why had Seth gone there? The answer would eventually become one of the foundations of the prosecution's case. The evidence indicated that Amber led Seth to believe that the two might reconcile. That meant Seth had been given a reason to go willingly. Once that connection was established, the location became increasingly important. Charlie Ely owned the house. Ely was 18 years old and was one of the people later prosecuted in connection with the murder. The house was where Seth had been brought and where the attack began. It was also the location where the group later attempted to conceal evidence. The investigation, therefore, had a physical center as well as a network of personal relationships. Seth's connection to Amber led toward the house. The house led toward Ely, Bargo, Hooper, and Soto. Those individuals, in turn, were connected to different stages of the attack. The picture was gradually becoming more coherent. According to the evidence later described by the courts, Kyle Hooper participated in the initial assault, striking Seth in the head. Bargo shot Seth. When Seth escaped from the house, Justin Soto pursued and restrained him, after which Seth was brought back inside. Bargo continued the attack and eventually caused Seth's death. The investigation had to connect these actions to the larger plan rather than treating them as unrelated events. This was especially important because Bargo's role went beyond physical participation. The Florida Supreme Court later identified him as the person who planned the murder and coordinated the involvement of the others. That conclusion was supported by the overall sequence presented at trial. Seth was brought to a predetermined location. People were waiting for him. Different participants took different roles during the attack. And afterward, the group attempted to conceal the crime. The investigation, therefore, did not simply ask who had been present. It asked how the people involved were connected and what each had done. Another important element was the history of hostility between Bargo and Seth. Approximately 1 week before the murder, Bargo had gone to Seth's home. During an argument, Seth's mother heard Bargo make a threat involving a bullet with Seth's name on it. That earlier confrontation provided investigators and prosecutors with context for the later killing. It showed that the conflict had escalated before April 17th. Again, however, the evidence must be described carefully. Bargo believed Seth had mistreated Amber, but the evidence presented at trial did not establish that his belief accurately reflected what had happened. The significance of the belief was that it formed part of the background to Bargo's hostility and the prosecution's explanation for his actions. As investigators continued examining what had happened, the efforts to conceal the murder also became important. Seth's body had been placed in a sleeping bag. Bargo and Soto had taken it to the fire pit behind Ely's house and burned it. Bleach had been used to clean the house. The remaining material had been placed into approximately 5-gallon paint buckets and discarded in a flooded quarry area. These actions created additional links among the people involved. The disposal of the body was not an isolated event carried out by an unknown person. It was connected to individuals already associated with the house and the murder. James Havens, Amber and Kyle's stepfather, was accused of helping with the aftermath, including assistance related to the disposal of the body and helping Bargo leave the area. His alleged role was legally different from that of the people directly prosecuted for Seth's murder. In 2012, Havens was determined incompetent to stand trial. For investigators, however, the central question remained the same: what had happened to Seth, and who was responsible? The answer emerged through the convergence of these relationships. Seth had been involved with Amber. Amber had become involved with Bargo. Bargo had developed hostility towards Seth. There had been threats. Then Amber had brought Seth to Ely's house. People connected to Bargo were waiting there. The attack occurred. Seth tried to escape. Soto restrained him. Bargo continued the attack until Seth died. The group then attempted to conceal the evidence. The sequence was too interconnected to be explained as a simple disappearance. It was a coordinated crime. As the investigation progressed, the people connected to Seth's final movements became suspects, and the case ultimately led to arrests and criminal charges. Each defendant would later face the courts separately, but the investigation had established the broad structure of what had happened. The evidence also undermined any suggestion that Seth had simply disappeared without explanation. His final known destination was connected to the people who had planned and carried out the attack. The role of Amber was particularly important because she had provided the bridge between Seth and the location. Without that connection, Seth might never have gone to the house in the first place. The investigation, therefore, had to look beyond physical evidence and consider the relationships among the people involved. In a case like this, personal connections can become as important as locations. The house explained where the attack happened. The relationships helped explain why Seth was there. The actions of the participants helped explain how the murder was carried out. And the attempts to conceal the body helped explain what happened afterward. The eventual arrests transformed the case from a missing person investigation into a homicide prosecution. But identifying suspects was only the beginning. Investigators and prosecutors still had to establish responsibility in court. They had to prove what each person had done and how the different actions fit together. That would become particularly important because the defendants did not all occupy the same role. Bargo was accused of planning and directing the murder. Amber was accused of helping lure Seth to the house. Hooper was involved in the initial assault. Soto restrained Seth and later assisted with moving the body. Ely owned the location where the ambush occurred. Havens was accused of assisting after the murder. The legal system would eventually assign different outcomes to these different forms of involvement. For Bargo, the case would become a long legal battle extending through multiple appeals and sentencing proceedings. But before the courtroom could decide those questions, the investigation had to reconstruct the story of April 17th. The central discovery was devastatingly simple. Seth Jackson had not vanished by chance. He had been brought to a particular place under false pretenses, where a group of people was waiting for him. He had been attacked, had tried to escape, and had been captured again. He had been killed. And afterward, the people involved had attempted to hide the evidence. Once investigators understood that sequence, the case could move into its next stage. The story would leave the house in Summerfield and enter the courtroom, where the question would no longer be simply what had happened to Seth. It would be a more difficult question. What was each person responsible for? What could prosecutors prove? And what punishment should follow for a murder that had been planned long before the first shot was fired? By the time the case reached the courtroom, the central question was no longer where Seth Jackson had gone. Investigators and prosecutors had reconstructed the sequence that led to his death. And the people connected to that sequence were now facing the legal consequences of their actions. But a murder investigation and a murder conviction are not the same thing. The courtroom required the prosecution to establish responsibility through evidence, and the role of each participant had to be considered separately. For Michael Shane Bargo, the central issue was whether he had planned and participated in the deliberate killing of 15-year-old Seth Jackson. The prosecution's case rested on a sequence that connected the events before, during, and after the murder. Bargo had developed hostility towards Seth. Approximately 1 week before the killing, he had gone to Seth's home, where an argument took place and Seth's mother heard Bargo make a threat involving a bullet with Seth's name on it. Then, according to the evidence accepted by the courts, Bargo planned the murder and coordinated the participation of others. Amber Wright, Seth's former girlfriend, brought Seth to Charlie Ely's house after giving him the impression that the two might reconcile. Bargo, Kyle Hooper, Justin Soto, and others were waiting. Once Seth arrived, Hooper struck him, Bargo shot him, and Seth attempted to escape. Soto pursued and restrained him, bringing him back inside. Bargo continued the attack and eventually caused Seth's death. Afterward, the group attempted to conceal the crime by moving and burning the body, cleaning the house, and disposing of the remains. Taken together, these events formed the foundation of the prosecution's argument that the murder had been planned rather than accidental. Bargo, however, denied responsibility for Seth's death. At trial, he maintained that he was not involved in the murder. The jury rejected that position. In 2013, Bargo was convicted of first-degree murder with a firearm. The conviction was a major turning point in the case, but it was not the end of the legal proceedings. Because prosecutors were seeking the death penalty, the case moved into another difficult stage, determining whether Bargo should be executed. The original jury recommended death by a vote of 10-2. That recommendation reflected the seriousness with which the jury viewed the murder. But the sentence would later become entangled with changes in Florida's capital sentencing law. The legal history of Bargo's case cannot be separated from the broader constitutional developments that followed the United States Supreme Court's decision in Hurst v. Florida. Those developments affected the way Florida courts handled death sentences and required reconsideration of Bargo's original sentence. In 2017, the Florida Supreme Court upheld Bargo's murder conviction but vacated the death sentence and sent the case back for a new sentencing proceeding. The important distinction was that the court did not find Bargo innocent or overturn the underlying murder conviction. The conviction remained. What changed was the legal status of the original death sentence. The case therefore entered another phase. Bargo would face a new sentencing proceeding in which the question was no longer whether he had committed the murder, but what punishment should be imposed for it. The result was significant. At the resentencing proceeding, a new jury unanimously recommended the death penalty, voting 12-0. The court then again imposed a death sentence. The unanimity of the second recommendation contrasted with the original 10-2 vote and became part of the later legal record. But even after the new sentence was imposed, Bargo's case did not end. The sentence was again challenged, and the Florida Supreme Court reviewed it. In 2021, the court upheld the death sentence. The legal process had therefore taken Bargo's case through several stages: conviction in 2013, an original death recommendation, appellate review, the 2017 decision vacating the sentence while leaving the conviction intact, resentencing with a unanimous recommendation for death, and finally the 2021 decision upholding the death sentence. This lengthy process demonstrates an important distinction in criminal cases. A conviction establishes guilt, while sentencing determines punishment. Appeals can challenge different parts of a judgment without necessarily reopening every question that has already been decided. In Bargo's case, the conviction survived the appellate review even when the original death sentence did not. But Bargo was not the only person whose actions had to be examined. The case involved several defendants, and their legal outcomes were different because their roles were different. Charlie Ely, 18 years old at the time of the murder, owned the house where the ambush occurred. He was convicted of murder and received a life sentence. Justin Soto, 20, participated in restraining Seth after Seth attempted to escape. Soto pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received a life sentence. Amber Wright's case was especially significant because of her connection to Seth. She had been his former girlfriend, and according to the evidence, she helped bring him to the house by creating the impression that they might reconcile. Amber was convicted of first-degree murder and ultimately received life imprisonment without parole. Kyle Hooper, Amber's 16-year-old brother, participated in the initial assault against Seth. He too was convicted of first-degree murder and received life imprisonment without parole. James Havens occupied a different position. He was not identified as one of the people who directly carried out the murder. Instead, he was accused of being an accessory after the fact to first-degree murder because of his alleged involvement in the aftermath, including assistance connected to the disposal of the body and helping Bargo leave the area. In 2012, Havens was determined incompetent to stand trial. The different outcomes show why the courtroom had to examine more than the simple question of who was present. The prosecution had to establish the role of each defendant. The evidence surrounding Bargo demonstrated planning and coordination. The evidence surrounding Amber demonstrated her role in bringing Seth to the location. Hooper's role involved the initial assault. Soto's role involved restraining Seth and assisting with the disposal of his body. Ely's connection included ownership of the house where the attack took place. Havens was accused of helping afterward. The law therefore treated their involvement through different charges and sentences. The courtroom also brought the case back to its central fact. Seth was 15 years old. He had been killed after being brought to a location where several people were waiting for him. The prosecution's theory was that the murder had been deliberate from the beginning, and the courts ultimately accepted the evidence establishing Bargo's role as the planner and coordinator. His denial of involvement was rejected by the jury. The later appellate decisions did not erase that conviction. Instead, they focused largely on the legal questions surrounding his punishment. By 2021, the Florida Supreme Court had upheld both the conviction and the death sentence. The courtroom phase of the case therefore established a legal record that reflected the structure of the crime. One person was identified as the planner and central actor. Others were convicted for their own participation. Another was accused of helping after the murder and was treated under a different legal framework. The case demonstrated how a single death can generate multiple criminal proceedings, each examining a different person's conduct. But beneath the legal terminology, first-degree murder, accessory after the fact, life imprisonment, death sentence was the same underlying event. A 15-year-old boy had gone to a house because he believed an old relationship might be repaired. Instead, he had been deliberately targeted. The people responsible had then attempted to conceal what they had done. The courts would spend years determining the legal consequences. Yet the verdicts could not change the most important fact of the case. The proceedings existed because Seth Jackson was no longer alive. The final stage of the story would therefore move beyond the mechanics of conviction and sentencing and return to the question that remains after every verdict. What does it mean to remember a 15-year-old whose life ended because several people chose to turn resentment into a plan for murder? The conviction of Michael Shane Bargo established the central legal conclusion of the case. But the murder of Seth Jackson did not involve Bargo alone. Several other people became part of the criminal proceedings, and their cases revealed how differently the law can treat people who participate in the same killing. Some were directly involved in the attack. One helped bring Seth to the location. Another provided the house where the ambush occurred. One was accused of helping after the murder rather than carrying it out. Their individual roles mattered, and so did the evidence presented against each of them. Understanding those differences is essential to understanding the full story of Seth Jackson's death. The first is Charlie Ely. Ely was 18 years old when the murder occurred and was the owner of the house in Summerfield, where Seth was brought. The house became the setting for the ambush. According to the evidence described in the case, Seth was brought there after Amber Wright gave him the impression that the two might reconcile. Once Seth arrived, Bargo, Kyle Hooper, Justin Soto, and others were waiting. The attack began inside the house. Ely's legal responsibility was ultimately determined separately from Bargo's. He was convicted of murder and received a life sentence. His case illustrates an important point about the prosecution of the group. The defendants did not need to have performed precisely the same physical act for the legal system to examine their responsibility for the murder. The evidence concerning the overall plan and the participation of different people allowed prosecutors to present the killing as a coordinated event. Ely's house was the location where that event took place, and his conviction reflected the court's determination of his criminal responsibility. Justin Soto was another important participant. Soto was 20 years old at the time of the murder. According to the evidence, after the initial attack, Seth managed to escape from the house. That attempt to flee could have been the moment when the plan collapsed. Instead, Soto pursued him and restrained him. Seth was brought back inside, where Bargo continued the attack. Soto's involvement therefore occurred at a critical moment. Seth had already been attacked, but he was still capable of trying to escape. Soto's pursuit prevented that escape and returned Seth to the place where the fatal violence continued. Soto later became involved in the disposal of Seth's body. After Seth was killed, his body was placed in a sleeping bag, and Bargo and Soto took it to the fire pit behind Ely's house, where it was burned. Soto ultimately pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received a life sentence. His case therefore ended differently from Bargo's, but the legal consequence was still severe. The evidence connected him not merely to the aftermath, but also to the physical events that prevented Seth from escaping. Then there was Amber Wright. Her role is perhaps the most emotionally difficult to separate from Seth's death because she had once been the person Seth was dating. Amber was 15 years old. She had been in a relationship with Seth beginning in late 2010, and they broke up in March 2011. Afterward, she began dating Bargo. According to the evidence, Amber helped bring Seth to Charlie Ely's house by leading him to believe that the two might reconcile. This meant that the relationship between Seth and Amber became part of the mechanism that allowed the ambush to happen. Seth knew her. He had a history with her. The invitation, therefore, did not appear to come from a stranger. It came from someone who had once been close to him. Amber's legal case reflected the seriousness attributed to that role. She was convicted of first-degree murder and ultimately received life imprisonment without parole. Her involvement demonstrates why the case cannot be reduced simply to the person who fired the fatal shots. The prosecution's theory was that the murder depended upon coordinated actions. If Seth had never been brought to the house, the ambush could not have taken place there. Amber's role was therefore examined as part of the larger plan. Kyle Hooper was Amber's brother. He was 16 when Seth was killed. His role came during the initial moments of the attack. According to the evidence, Hooper struck Seth in the head after Seth entered the house. Bargo then shot Seth. When Seth later attempted to escape, Soto pursued and restrained him. Hooper's participation therefore occurred at the beginning of the physical attack. He was later convicted of first-degree murder and received life imprisonment without parole. His age is another difficult aspect of the case. 16 years old is an age associated with adolescence, yet the conduct for which Hooper was convicted was participation in a planned killing. The legal system ultimately imposed the most serious form of imprisonment available short of the death penalty. His case, like Amber's, demonstrates how a person's age did not prevent prosecutors from pursuing a first-degree murder conviction when the evidence supported their case. James Havens occupied a very different position. Havens was 37 years old and was Amber and Kyle's stepfather. Unlike the younger defendants, he was not identified in the supplied material as one of the people who directly killed Seth. Instead, he was accused of being an accessory after the fact to first-degree murder. His alleged involvement concerned the period after Seth had already been killed. According to the case information, Havens was accused of assisting with the aftermath, including help connected to disposing of the body and helping Bargo leave the area. This distinction between the murder itself and assistance afterward was legally significant. An accessory after the fact is not being accused of performing the same act as the person who commits the murder. The allegation concerns assistance given after the crime has occurred. In Havens's case, however, the proceedings did not reach the same conclusion as those involving the other defendants. In 2012, he was determined incompetent to stand trial. That meant his case followed a different legal path and did not result in the same type of trial and conviction described for the other participants. Looking at all of the defendants together reveals the structure of the case more clearly. Bargo was identified as the planner and coordinator. Amber helped bring Seth to the house. Ely owned the house where the ambush occurred. Hooper participated in the initial attack. Soto restrained Seth after he tried to escape and later helped move the body. Havens was accused of assisting after the murder. The roles were different, but they intersected around the same event. The legal system then separated those roles again, determining the charges, convictions, and sentences applicable to each person. The outcomes were severe. Bargo received a death sentence that was ultimately upheld by the Florida Supreme Court in 2021. Ely received life imprisonment. Soto received life imprisonment after pleading guilty to first-degree murder. Amber received life without parole. Hooper received life without parole. Havens was found incompetent to stand trial in 2012 in connection with the accessory after the fact charge. These outcomes did not undo the events of April 17, 2011. They represented the legal response to them. The case also illustrates why the word accomplice can be too simple when describing a complicated murder. The participants did not all do the same thing, and the prosecution did not need to prove identical conduct by every defendant. Instead, each person's actions had to be placed within the broader sequence. The evidence showed that Seth was brought to the house attacked, prevented from escaping, killed, and then subjected to an attempt at concealment. The defendants' different roles existed at different points along that sequence. The courtroom therefore became a place where the entire chain could be separated into individual acts. Who planned? Who helped lure Seth there? Who attacked him? Who prevented his escape? Who helped conceal the evidence? The answers produced different legal outcomes. But behind those distinctions remained one common fact. All of these proceedings began because Seth Jackson, a 15-year-old boy, had been killed. His life could not be divided into legal categories. For his family, there was no distinction between the moment of the attack and the years of court proceedings that followed. There was simply a son who was gone, The convictions established responsibility in the eyes of the law, but they could not restore him. And as the legal cases moved through trials and appeals, the central human reality remained unchanged. Seth had been invited to a house under circumstances he did not understand. He entered believing one thing. The people waiting for him intended another. His attempt to escape failed. He was killed. His body was concealed. And afterward, several people would spend years facing the consequences of decisions that had begun with a teenage relationship and escalated into murder. The final question is therefore not simply what sentences the defendants received. It is what remains after the sentences are imposed. For the people involved, there were convictions, prison terms, appeals, and a death sentence. For Seth, there was no second chance, no appeal, and no return home. The final chapter of the story must therefore move beyond the defendants and return to the person whose absence made every courtroom proceeding necessary. The story of Seth Jackson does not end with a verdict. In a legal sense, the case continued through trials, appeals, resentencing, and the final review of Michael Shane Bargo's death sentence. But for Seth's family, the most important event had already happened on April 17, 2011. A 15-year-old boy had gone to a house in Summerfield, Florida, and never returned. Everything that followed, the arrests, the evidence, the courtroom arguments, the convictions, and the sentences, was an attempt by the justice system to answer for that loss. The facts established through the proceedings form a disturbing sequence. Seth had once been in a relationship with Amber Wright. They began dating in late 2010 and broke up in March 2011. After the breakup, Amber began a relationship with Michael Shane Bargo. Bargo developed a serious hostility towards Seth, believing that Seth had mistreated Amber, although the evidence at trial did not establish that this belief reflected reality. The conflict escalated into threats. Approximately 1 week before the murder, Bargo went to Seth's home, where an argument occurred, and Seth's mother heard Bargo threaten him with a bullet that had Seth's name on it. Then came April 17th. Amber brought Seth to Charlie Ely's house after giving him the impression that they might reconcile. He arrived without knowing that the people waiting for him had another purpose. Inside were people connected to the plan. Kyle Hooper attacked Seth. Bargo shot him. Seth managed to escape the house, but Justin Soto pursued and restrained him. He was brought back inside. Bargo continued the attack, beating and verbally abusing Seth and firing additional shots. According to the evidence presented in court, Bargo wanted Seth to know who was responsible for his death. Eventually, Bargo fired the shot that killed him. The killing was followed by an attempt to erase the evidence. Seth's body was placed in a sleeping bag. Bargo and Soto moved it to the fire pit behind Ely's house and burned it. Bleach was used to clean the house. The remaining material was placed into approximately 5-gallon paint buckets and discarded in a flooded quarry area. James Havens was accused of assisting after the murder, including involvement connected to the disposal of the body and helping Bargo leave the area. Each of these actions became part of the legal story that followed. But the legal story was not identical for every participant. That distinction is important because justice in a criminal case is not simply a matter of placing everyone involved into one category. The courts examined individual responsibility. Charlie Ely was convicted of murder and received life imprisonment. Justin Soto pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received life imprisonment. Amber Wright was convicted of first-degree murder and ultimately received life imprisonment without parole. Kyle Hooper was also convicted of first-degree murder and received life imprisonment without parole. Havens, who was accused of being an accessory after the fact to first-degree murder, was determined incompetent to stand trial in 2012. Michael Bargo's case followed a longer and more complicated path. In 2013, he was convicted of first-degree murder with a firearm. The original jury recommended the death penalty by a vote of 10-2. But the legal system surrounding capital punishment in Florida changed after the United States Supreme Court's decision in Hurst versus Florida. In 2017, the Florida Supreme Court upheld Bargo's conviction while vacating his death sentence and requiring a new sentencing proceeding. This distinction is crucial. The court did not conclude that Bargo had been wrongly convicted of killing Seth. The murder conviction remained intact. The issue was the legality of the original sentencing process. At the subsequent resentencing, a new jury unanimously recommended death, voting 12-0. The court again imposed the death penalty. The case continued to be reviewed, and in 2021 the Florida Supreme Court upheld Bargo's death sentence. In that sense, the legal system eventually reached a final conclusion regarding his punishment, even though the consequences of the case extended far beyond a single judgment. The years between the murder and the later appellate decisions also demonstrate how different the passage of time can feel depending on where a person stands. For the courts, years may be filled with motions, hearings, legal standards, appeals, and constitutional questions. For a family that has lost a child, time does not necessarily create an equivalent distance from the original loss. The fact that Seth was 15 remains central to understanding the tragedy. He was not simply a name in a legal record. He was a teenager whose life ended before adulthood. His death resulted from a conflict that had begun with relationships and resentment and developed into a deliberate plan. That progression is perhaps the most difficult part of the case to comprehend. Arguments and jealousy are familiar human experiences. Murder is not. There is an enormous distance between being angry with another person and deciding that the person should die. The evidence in this case describes how that distance was crossed through a series of choices. Someone had to decide to plan the killing. Someone had to help bring Seth to the location. People had to wait for him. Others had to participate in the assault. Someone had to prevent his escape. And after the killing, additional decisions were made to conceal the body and clean the scene. None of those actions was inevitable. Each represented a choice. That is why the identification of Bargo as the planner and coordinator was so significant in the legal proceedings. The Florida Supreme Court's characterization of his role placed him at the center of a sequence involving several other participants. Yet the convictions of the other defendants also demonstrated that responsibility extended beyond one person. The case was not about a lone attacker acting without preparation. It was about multiple people whose actions became connected to the death of a 15-year-old. The aftermath also raises a difficult question about the consequences of violence. Prison sentences and a death sentence are legal punishments, but they do not restore what was lost. They cannot return Seth to his family. They cannot reverse the moment he entered the house. They cannot erase the final hours of his life. What the justice system can do is establish responsibility through evidence and impose punishment within the law. In Seth's case, that process produced convictions and severe sentences. But justice and restoration are not the same thing. A sentence can answer the legal question of punishment while leaving the human question of loss permanently unresolved. There is also a caution in the way this case began. The people involved were young. Bargo was 18. Amber was 15. Hooper was 16. Ely was 18. Soto was 20. The ages do not diminish the seriousness of what happened, nor do they excuse the decisions that led to murder, but they underline how quickly anger, resentment, and interpersonal conflict can become catastrophic when people choose violence instead of separation. The case is therefore not frightening simply because of the brutality of the killing. It is frightening because of the deliberate progression that preceded it. The murder did not occur in an instant of unexplained chaos. According to the evidence, it was planned. A relationship had ended. Another relationship had begun. Resentment grew. Threats were made. A plan was formed. A teenager was deceived into going to a particular house. And once he arrived, the plan was carried out. That sequence leaves no room for romanticizing the perpetrators or turning the crime into entertainment. The most important person in this story is the person who never had the opportunity to tell his own version in court. Seth Jackson was 15. His life ended before he could become an adult, build a career, form a family, or simply discover what the next years might have brought. The courtroom could reconstruct the circumstances of his death, but it could never reconstruct the future that disappeared with him. That is ultimately what remains at the center of the Seth Jackson case. The names of the defendants, the legal arguments, and the sentences are part of the historical record. But the purpose of remembering the case should not be to make the killers larger than the victim. It should be to understand how a series of deliberate choices destroyed a young life and left permanent consequences for everyone connected to it. Michael Bargo's death sentence, the life sentences of the other convicted participants, and the separate legal outcome involving James Havens represent the conclusions reached by the courts. Yet the final conclusion is simpler and more painful. Seth Jackson should have gone home that night. He did not. He had been given a reason to enter a place where people were waiting to kill him, and the people responsible then attempted to conceal what they had done. Years of investigation and litigation eventually established responsibility, but no verdict could undo the loss. The case, therefore, ends not with the image of a courtroom, but with the memory of a 15-year-old whose life was cut short. The legal record can tell us who was convicted, what roles they played, and what sentences they received. It can explain how investigators reconstructed the crime and how the courts responded. But beyond all of those facts is the human truth that gives the case its weight. A teenage boy was alive before April 17, 2011, and he was not alive afterward. Everything that followed was an attempt to make sense of that irreversible fact.